the Whig supremacy was enabled by the Hanoverian succession of George I in 1714 and the failed Jacobite rising of 1715 by Tory rebels. So you can find here that the Whig supremacy is being associated with the particular time period because it actually enabled by the Hanoverian succession of George I in 1714 and the failed Jacobite rising of 1715 by Tory rebels. The Whigs thoroughly purged the Tories from all major positions, you see. So this is very significant because so far as the political and social perspectives are concerned, you will find that Whigs are thoroughly, they were purging the social Tories from all major positions. In case of government, say, or maybe the army, the church, the legal profession, the local offices, everywhere, from everywhere, they are doing so. The party's hold on power was so strong, you see, and durable that historians call the period from roughly 1714 to 1783 as the age of Whig oligarchy. Can you imagine that? And you will find that somehow the first great leader of the Whigs was Robert Walpole, to be specific. So that was the fundamental position or considerations regarding the Whigs here. So now take a look towards the Tories. Who are the Tories? Again, I have found that somehow the Tories are the British political party, as I mentioned earlier, that it is the typical opponents of the Whigs. And here you will find that the Tories were a political faction again, and then a political party in the Parliament of England, Scotland, and Great Britain, Ireland, United Kingdom, just like the Whigs. And between the 1680s and 1850s, the Tories contested power with their rivals, the Whigs. In 1678, as it has been mentioned here, you will find that the first Tories emerged in England as Jacobites. You see, what Jacobites? Jacobites are the groups who are against the Hanoverian dynasty. That means they were with a particular view that a true and legal contestant, or maybe the successor, or maybe the king, will be the followers of the Stuarts, you see, not the Hanoverian dynasty, because the bloodline actually changed with the Hanovers. So what it says that in 1678, the first Tories emerged in England as Jacobites when they opposed the Whig-supported Exclusion Bill, you see, which set out to disinherit the heir presumptive James, you see. It is the disinheritance of James, Duke of York, who eventually became James II, as we know, of England and seven of Scotland. This particular party ceased to exist as an organized political party in the early 1760s, although it was used as a term of self-description by some political writers, in some cases as an insult, you see. A few decades later, a new Tory party would rise to establish a hold on government between 1783 and 1830 with William Pitt the Younger, followed by Robert Jenkinson, the second Earl of Liverpool. So these are the informations that have been taken from Wikipedia, and probably if you want to take a look in detail, that means who are the Whigs and Tories, what are the differences, what they thought about, what are the political agenda, you can just go through the Google again. So now let us think about the important section, that is the London, the political context, you see. That means whenever we will think of this particular text, London, what are the political agenda, what are the political context that we have to keep it in mind or keep in mind. You will find that somehow London, this particular text, as it has been mentioned, as I have discussed in my last lecture, that London is conceptualized as a particular poem that is written following the Juvenalian satire the third, you see. That means Johnson is deliberately keeping a kind of a link between a classical text and this one. Why he is doing so? You see that the classical atmosphere does afford a kind of Augustan respectability to the poem, giving it weight, universality, and make it general rather than merely topical and particular. Because it is, as I've mentioned, that it is a political poem. So somehow Johnson is trying to make it universal, give it weight by keeping a kind of a link between this one and Juvenalian satire of that one, you see. Probably you will know that in this particular text, Johnson is not mentioning his name or any other political persons. Rather, he is using some allegorical works, or the names have been invented by Johnson to some extent. That's why he is in want of keeping the text far from direct politics at the time, you see, though he is focusing at politics. So, in spite of keeping a kind of a relation with the classical temperament, classical atmosphere, London is an intensely political poem, and with it is full of allusions to current matters like the Licensing Act, as I mentioned earlier, or the need for war with Spain. So, these have been taken in consideration. You will find that just like Alexander Pope, as it has been mentioned here, Samuel Johnson was also considered to be a pro-Jacobite. You see, what is pro-Jacobite? As I mentioned earlier, that the pro-Jacobite, this particular term, it can be related with, you see, that who is a pro-Jacobite? That the pro-Jacobites are the persons who felt that the Hanoverian kings, you see, the Hanoverian kings had to legitimate right, okay, low legitimate right to the throne, and who might support a Stuart bid to regain power. That means they were with the particular view that Hanoverian kings had no legitimate right to the throne. They were with the particular view. So, as I mentioned in my previous slide, so and who might support a Stuart bid to regain power. That means they were the followers of the Stuart dynasties. They were with the particular view that the Stuart followers should be legally the kings, not the Hanoverian kings. You see, again, the ethnic purity or maybe the bloodline is that matters. Walpole had been the first minister of the Whig ministry for nearly 20 years. His enemies included not only Tories but also opposition Whigs. So at one point there you can get the Tories are there, who are against the typical monarchy, and so the second point there you can get the opposition Whigs, who were forming groups around Frederick, the Prince of Wales, and called themselves Young Patriots. So this is another section you will find, the opposition Whigs, who are considering themselves Young Patriots, because you will find that somehow that particular group has been created following or centering Frederick, Prince of Wales. Again, you will find that the Young Patriots, they disliked Walpole. So what is the basic temperaments of these Young Patriots? You will find that they disliked Walpole, true, but were not against the principles of the Hanoverian kings. So Young Patriots were not the Jacobites or pro-Jacobites. Temperamental differences are there. But at the same time, you will find that there were Tories with Jacobite views. So at one point, there are Young Patriots who were not like Jacobite, but they disliked Walpole. At another point, there are Tories, they were with the Jacobite views, and they detested both Walpole and George II. You see. Then you can get another character whose name is Bolingbroke, the Tory politician Bolingbroke. He was a pro-Stuart, so you can find again the same temperament. And he was a frequent writer in the periodical The Craftsman, as I mentioned earlier. And he tried to unite the opposition groups, okay, or country party against the court or those in power. So there are a stark two groups have been created. One, the country party, and second, the court. So this particular term was being used by Bolingbroke. Bolingbroke thought that the Prince of Wales might be turned into a patriot king. Prince of Wales, that is Frederick, whose name, as I mentioned, he might be turned into a patriot king, leading all true Britons, again the term true Britain. So the ethnic purity is at the focus in the spirit of their ancient liberty. Here you can find the terms like liberty, patriot, true Britons. These were the catchwords. These are the words that actually were used by the malcontents. Who are malcontents? The person who has a grudge against the established norm and society and administration. And here the malcontents are the Young Patriots. The malcontents were the Tories. The malcontents were the country party, quote unquote. So here you will find that the liberty, patriot, true Britons, these were the catchwords of the malcontents or opponents of Walpole. And that particular mood, that very mood, the typical oppositional mood, is being reflected in this particular text, that is London. So fundamentally, whenever you will go through the text of London, You need to carry, you need to bear the typical political context, the typical historico-political or historio-political temperament, the political agendas that have been used by these persons, and then only you can identify why Johnson is writing in this particular way. Though changed later in 1930s, Johnson's writing, you see, like this one, London, like Vanity of Human Wishes, and another, the very significant one, as I've mentioned here, Murmur Nolfolson's. This one, these were anti-Walpole and critical of George II, to be specific. Now, let us take a look on the ground for Johnson's attacks on Walpole. As I have mentioned here and also in the previous slides, that these informations have been gathered from the book, that is the Worldview edition on Johnson, Gray and Goldsmith, poets of the mid-18th century, and it was edited by Harriet Raghunathan. And I have taken the informations, some of the informations from Harriet Raghunathan, as is mentioned in the source. You will find here that these are the grounds for Johnson's attack on Walpole. That is, what are Walpole's temperament and positions and significations that Walpole is making. Here you will find that London emphasizes on the suppression of independent thinking. As we know, liberty of speech, liberty of thought, liberty of press, these are the things that actually any particular monarch, any particular ruler always tried to impose licenses, you see. So London emphasizes on the suppression of independent thinking. Suppression of independent thinking, mind it. And the difficulties faced by outspoken writers. That means whenever a writer is writing something, you see, against the government, against the administration, then certainly the punishments came on her. So here you will find that there are difficulties faced by the outspoken writers in getting rewards, recognitions. They cannot get that. Walpole, you see, as it has been mentioned in this particular text, or it had been referred in this particular text, this Walpole was believed to be the fountainhead of corruption. Can you imagine that? Okay, but again, I should say that we are reading this particular text from the point of view of Johnson. It is not that Johnson is stating these, Johnson is with the particular ideology against the Whigs. That's why the Whigs are bad. Not that. But ultimately, when we will go through the text of Johnson, we need to carry the basic temperament that Johnson tries to carry forward. Walpole's different bills, you see, the first one is Excise Bill. You see, it was published in 1733, and it actually raised an outcry. Why? Because the excise officers, they could enter and search premises to check tax evasion anywhere. You know, if you were the excise officer, you can enter anywhere, any person's house, just to identify if the tax was being evaded. And it actually, this activity, it actually symbolized as an attack on British liberties, and somehow this particular form has been criticized by Johnson in his writings. Again, you will find in the next point it has been mentioned that Walpole's taxes on salt, taxes on salt and gin, it was very unpopular with the poor. Okay, think about the elections that has been mentioned in the next point. That Walpole controlled elections. In a contemporary scenario, you will find that anywhere or in any places, the elections have been manipulated. Manipulations have been there. And here you will find that Walpole has doing so, the same thing he is doing. So Walpole controlled elections through bribery, manipulations, and rewarding to his supporters with pensions, places of profit. So these were there, you see. So there's a kind of a corruption that was Walpole is practicing at the time. Johnson himself, in his Vanity of Human Wishes, line number 97, as I mentioned here, Johnson criticized the Septennial Act. What is Septennial Act? That made elections compulsory. Only every 7 years. That means after 7 years. That was been criticized by Johnson in Vanity of Human Wishes. Again, to control press, Walpole imposed the Special Juries Act of 1729. Press had to be controlled. Why? Because the press can motivate people against you. So somehow, same kind of thing had been made, same kind of pattern was being performed during the time of John Milton. And probably you have heard of the name Areopagitica by Milton. And Milton wrote for the freedom of press. And again, you will find the same problem arose during the time of Walpole. To control press, Walpole imposed the Special Juries Act of 1729. What it did actually, it provided compliant juries that could be relied on to find opposition printers, publisher, authors guilty. That means whenever a printer, a publisher, an author is found guilty, necessary steps were taken against them. You will find that the Tory periodical, the Craftsman that I mentioned, the Craftsman, this is the particular place where Bolingbroke and others are writing. The Tory periodical Craftsman faced persecution 6 times. Can you imagine that? And Walpole, again, in the next point, you will find that Walpole imposed the Licensing Act of 1737. And that particular act was in effect till 1968. So how long you can find? 1968, just few years before. And this Licensing Act actually ensured government control over any stage performance. It was needed, you see. But customarily, whenever a film was being published, you see, or released, any drama was performed, that if it was against the government or maybe any political scenario, then the banning was imposed on them. The same kind of thing was there, you see. Walpole was imposing them the government control over the stage performance and rendered unlicensed theaters illegal. Walpole founded, for the making of propaganda, as you see. Walpole founded the official newspaper of his ministry, the Gazetteer. What is Gazetteer? It was an official newspaper and financed others like the Hip Doctor, which propagated his views, the views he wanted. That means the particular kind of view that Walpole was in want. Such views were being published in these newspapers. Why? Because it was funded by Walpole. He spent £50,000 between 1731 to 1741 as press propaganda. It was a propaganda making, you see. Another ground for attack on Walpole was his policy of peace with Spain. What happened during this time? You will find that Britain and Spain, I'm reading from Harriet Raghunathan, Britain and Spain were imperial and commercial rivals in the Americas at this time. And Britain resented Spain's harassment of her ships in the Caribbean. It was easy for the opposition to whip up patriotic hysteria about the Spanish coast guards or coast guards' capture and torture of British sailors, or their cutting off Captain Jenkins's ear in 1731. So these are actually happening. The rivalry, the problems, the instigations to any further war. But Walpole, dynamically to some extent, Walpole, from a typical diplomatic point of view, Walpole's policy of peace may in fact have been a sensible and beneficial one in view of the substantial trade with mainland Spain. That means he thought about the peace. As I've mentioned, that is the thing actually, that Walpole made a policy of peace with Spain. It was beneficiary for Britain at the time regarding, business and merchandising. But somehow the people who are, typically they're suffering from the hysteria of nationalism. The people thought that these were not good. These were something problematic. Why? Because it actually indicates it was a sign of Britain's decline. So that was the thing, that Spain and would have suffered in any war, and the high taxes on landowners that would have been necessary. But it appeared to his enemies, the enemies like, as I mentioned, that is the Young Patriots and others. It appeared to his enemies as disgracefully submissive and a sign of Britain's decline. In later years, ultimately, Johnson, who is actually during this time period, he's criticizing Walpole. In the later years, Johnson said that he honored Walpole's memory for having kept his country in peace many years. as also for the goodness and placeability of his temper. But in 1738, when he is writing this particular poem, he was very outspoken in his criticism of Walpole's government. So fundamentally, whenever we will go with this particular text, we have to know something about Johnson's temperament. I'm not saying that what Johnson thought and what Johnson did, these were altogether very good, something very, you know, effectual at the time. But whenever we will go through the particular text, we need to keep it in mind that what was the temperament, what was the political agenda that Johnson is trying to propagate through this particular poem, that is London. So today up to this, and in this particular these lectures, we have found the political perspectives, the political presentations, and political scenario and agenda behind uh, this particular text, that is London by Samuel Johnson, and try to go with the text. From the next lectures, we will go with the text. It's a long one, and we will take 2 or 3 lectures more to complete this particular text. Try to go with the text. Try to go with the necessary informations from internet and Wikipedia and other resources that you have. So today up to this, thank you then.